Unfortunately, I was cut short in my post yesterday, but I'm happy to be able to relay the rest of this to all of you before I get out on the road. When I woke up, everything was still dark. I wondered if I was even still alive. All I knew was that it was dark and I couldn't move. Then I heard a groan from nearby. Ah, shit. I heard Lita's voice say softly before I heard a slight rustling like someone was struggling. Lita? I croaked out in question and I heard a gasp from nearby. Thank fucking goodness, you're still alive, she breathed. Then she let out a more frustrated sound. But that means they caught you. Look, I have a plan to get us out of here, but you need to do exactly what I say if you want to survive this, she said in a hushed tone. What about Hank? I whispered back and Lita was quiet for a long moment before she spoke up again. Hank's beyond saving now. You don't want to know. Trust me, she said with a pained whisper. Now stop talking. You don't want them knowing you're awake, and whatever you do, don't let them feed you anything, she said with a renewedly steeled tone. I did as I was told and shut up after that. I don't know how long we stayed in that darkness. I could feel myself suspended in the air and completely unable to move. It felt like I was wrapped up in some kind of cocoon made of a sticky substance similar to that of a spider's web. It was exactly the same conditions that Abigail had described in her story. The only sounds I heard all that time were an occasional shuffling, which I assumed to be Lita, and the distant sound of footsteps and soft growls. After what could have been hours or even days of just staying silent in that oppressive darkness, I heard a ripping noise, and then a loud thunk and a grunt. I wanted to speak, but remembered Lita's words and forced myself to remain quiet. I just waited and hoped that was the sound of Lita escaping. I heard footsteps approaching me and held my breath while attempting to press myself back against the stone wall behind me on a deep-rooted instinct to cringe away from the unknown thing that approached. Then I heard a ripping noise shortly before my bindings gave way, and I went crashing unceremoniously to the rock floor below. While I lay there with the wind knocked out of me, Lita ripped the sticky bindings away from me and I quickly scrambled to my feet. You're going to have to trust me. Stay close to me and I'll get you out of here, Lita whispered in my ear. I nodded before realizing she couldn't see me in the pitch black darkness and instead whispered back, Okay. It was all I could think to say at that moment. I heard a strange crunching noise, and then Lita grabbed my hand and started to swiftly lead me along as if she was able to see where she was going. I noticed that her nails felt sharper than before as she held tight on my hand. I felt fear bubble up as I wondered if she was becoming something like what Abigail had turned into, but I forced myself to bury that fear. Right then, Lita was my only chance of making it out of that place. I had to trust her. I didn't have any other option. We moved through the darkness for what seemed like forever. We seemed to be moving through some sort of massive tunnel or cave network, like the one from Abigail's story. We would mostly move with hurried steps, but on various occasions, Lita would stop me and pull me into little crevices or side tunnels when the sounds of footsteps neared us. Then, after the footsteps faded, we would continue on our way again. I began to wonder if we would just be wandering this cave network until we finally just collapsed. I could already feel the hunger, dehydration, and exhaustion gnawing at me. But I kept pace with Lita, forcing myself to keep walking even when it felt like my legs were turning to stone. Then, I finally saw a beautiful sight. There was light streaming into the stony area about 15 feet ahead of us after we'd turned a corner. As we drew closer to the light, I could see that it was moonlight, streaming into a large hole of some sort that looked to have been dug by massive claws. The hole was roughly 5 feet above us and led into some kind of tunnel to the surface. I felt my heart sink as I realized there was no way we could reach the hole to escape through it. We would have to continue on back into the darkness. "I'll boost you up to the edge of the hole. Do you think you can pull yourself out?" Lita spoke up as I let myself fall into a crestfallen state. I looked at Lita's petite 5-foot form in bewilderment. I felt my eyes widen as I was finally able to take in her appearance. Lita's form had changed. She had grown more muscled, and she looked practically feral. Her short black hair was wild and she was covered in dirt, but she looked uninjured despite her dirty appearance and very torn, blood-stained clothing. Her nails had turned to claws, and when she spoke, I could see her teeth had changed to sharpened points. While I finally met her eyes, they were no longer that piercing hazel green they had been. Now her pupils had changed to slits, and her eyes were a glowing gold shade. I instinctively took a few steps back from her as I took in her inhuman features, and she firmly grabbed my wrist. "Now's not the time. I told you. If you want to make it out of this, you're going to have to trust me," she said firmly. I slowly nodded and she released me in return. Then she laced her fingers together and placed her palms upward to allow me to step on them so she could lift me to the hole. I complied, and she lifted me with surprising ease. I dug my fingers into the dirt and scrabbled my way up through the hole and out into the forest above. I collapsed onto the ground on my back, taking in deep lungfuls of air for a moment and let out a short laugh of relief to be away from that horrid darkness. Then I remembered Lita. I looked down through the hole that appeared to be an animal burrow hidden beneath a large, thick bush from the outside. Lita looked up at me with glowing golden orbs before she jumped upwards and dug her clawed hands into the dirt. I grabbed her hands and helped pull her out of the hole, though I'm not entirely sure she needed my help at all. Once we were both out in the forest, Lita held a hand up when she saw me about to speak. "No questions. Not until we're out of here. Don't talk. Just follow and do what I say. That's how you're going to make it to see the sunrise," she said in a voice that left no room for argument. I nodded in response to show her I understood. She nodded back and then we were off. The forest was still as strangely quiet as it was when we were captured, and I wondered if it was even the same night anymore. I had no idea how many days had passed since we were taken down into the cave network. We could have been down in that cave system for days for all I knew. We just walked in silence as the moon moved across the sky. I didn't ask where we were going. All I knew to do at that point was follow Lita and hope that she had a plan. Lita seemed to tense some as we walked, but she said nothing beyond making a circular upward motion with her hand that I took to mean as, "Be on your guard." "You're quite the clever little girl. Such a shame you chose the wrong side of this war." A deep, rumbling voice spoke that seemed to echo around us. Lita let out a soft growl in response. "Yeah? If you're so upset about it, then why not come and handle me yourself? Unless you're too scared to face me directly. You seem chicken shit with the way you're having all your lackeys do the fighting for you." She barked back, which earned cold laughter from the voice which I assumed to belong to the coyote, since it was the only other creature I'd actually heard speak up to that point. Then, a dark shape seemed to emerge from a nearby oak tree that quickly shifted and took the form of that coyote I was beginning to grow familiar with seeing. It was grinning at us, with its head cocked to the side ever so slightly, as if it were amused. "As you wish," he said before he rushed at us with alarming speed. Lita was backhanded hard enough that she went flying through a number of trees which crashed to the ground as Lita skidded to stop on all fours roughly 30 feet away. The deep gouges in her forearm she'd gotten from the coyote's claws were already healing as she charged at the coyote. The coyote let out a roar that was mixed with laughter as Lita charged at it, as if it were relishing the challenge that had been presented to it. The ensuing fight was one I only caught glimpses of as I attempted to distance myself from the two. I saw glimpses of Lita savagely tearing into the coyote and drawing inky black blood from the thing with each hit. She was superhumanly strong with the way she was able to send the coyote flying. It had grown to be at least twice her size by that point, with a far more muscled figure than its previously gaunt form. The fight between the two seemed as if it would never end as they destroyed the forest around them. Every time the two dealt injuries to the other, they would heal almost as fast as they were given. Trees felled around the two, and slowly their battle zone was changed more into a clearing filled with jagged stumps and fallen trees. Despite Lita's strength, she still seemed out of her league against the coyote. As fast as she was able to heal, the coyote still dealt more damage than Lita, and seemed to land attacks on her far more than she did to it. And yet she never seemed to tire or give up. She just looked at the coyote with this deep-seated rage as she stubbornly continued to battle it. I stayed hidden behind a large rock on a small cliff near the battlefield. I should have run, but I just couldn't as I watched in horror, and yet almost wonder, as the two superhuman entities clashed. I just silently hoped their fight would not come near to me, as I knew I would only get in the way or get hurt in this battle between two things who were far beyond the strength of a normal person like me. I could already see Lita was facing a challenge against the coyote, with it only having one arm, and I wondered just how dangerous would this thing be without that handicap. Then I quickly pushed that thought away as I felt panic overtaking me at that idea. Whatever the hell this thing was, it was a monster of overwhelming strength that I could still barely fathom the existence of. Finally, the coyote got the upper hand, if you could even really call the hulking, patchy furred thing a coyote anymore. It managed to pin Lita to the ground with its massive clawed hand holding her down by her throat and upper chest. Lita choked and gagged as she clawed and kicked at the coyote's arm, and it just laughed at her, struggling even with her claws tearing chunks from its arm. I felt panic build up in my chest at the sight. I felt as if I had to do something to help Lita, but I had no idea what I could do. If Lita wasn't able to stop the thing, there was no way I stood a chance. But I decided that I couldn't leave Lita to just perish at the hands of this thing. I'd already lost Hank. I just couldn't stand by and lose her too. I picked up a heavy rock from the ground nearby and attempted to stealthily approach the coyote while its attention was focused on Lita. "You make delicious prey, little girl. Such a shame that you didn't last longer. It has been so long since I've been provided such a challenge. My compliments. Even your mother wasn't quite so strong as you. But alas, you'll suffer the same fate as she did." The coyote hummed with glee while Lita glared up at it, with seething hatred in her expression. "I'll kill you," she snarled back in a choked, gasping voice as she more viciously attempted to struggle loose from the grip of the thing. "Ah, still so spirited. I'm sure that fire in you will only make you an even more delectable morsel." The coyote chuckled, simply seeming amused by Lita's fury. The coyote opened its jaw wide, as its face split into 4 even pieces and opened like horrific flower petals, to reveal a large black maw, lined with white needle-sharp teeth, and out from its throat flickered a deep red tongue, reminiscent of a massive octopus tentacle, lined with suckers that had silver spikes at the centers. I rushed forwards to hurl the rock right at the head of the creature, and hopefully distract it long enough to let Lita get loose. The thing closed in as if aiming to bite into Lita with its monstrous mouth. I felt a sinking in my chest. I was too late. Even with Lita's astounding healing abilities, there was no way she could survive her head being bitten off. But then the thing's head exploded in black gore as a loud bang sounded throughout the forest. Its body was soon torn apart by more explosions as more loud bangs filled the forest. Lita bolted to her feet as the creature's body started to dissolve into that black liquid I had seen the other things dissolve into. Its head flopped to the ground and changed back to the more coyote-like shape. Somehow, it even spoke with its head now being the only solid piece of it left. "This isn't over," it huffed out. "You haven't seen the last of me. We will have our victory," it gasped. Then its head exploded in another burst of gore, and all that was left of the beast was puddles of black goo that quickly dried and floated up into the air in little black flecks as the sky started to change with the first shades of dawn. I felt the rock drop from my hands as a familiar voice spoke from the edge of the tree line. "You sure made quite a mess here, huh?" I turned and couldn't believe my eyes. There Briggs stood with a shotgun in hand and a proud grin present on his face. Lita gave Briggs a withering look in response. "Took you long enough, Grandpa. Those damn reinforcements you promised were almost too late. We lost some good people while you jackasses sat around with your thumbs up your asses," she scolded the older man. I felt my mind begin to swim as I tried to process all the events that had transpired over the course of the terrifying affair. As I tried to take in the scene in front of me of the heated back and forth between Lita and Briggs, all their voices sounded like to me were faraway echoes. Blackness started to form at the edges of my vision, and then I fell unconscious. When I woke up, I was in a hospital in the nearest city to the state park. I was told I'd been transported to the hospital from a clinic in the nearby town to the state park. According to the hospital staff, I had been brought in with deep gashes, dehydrated and emaciated. I'd apparently woken up and spoken deliriously of monstrous animals attacking. So it was assumed I'd been attacked by either a bear or wildcat based on my injuries, and I had become lost in the forest for days before eventually being discovered by two hikers. At first I attempted to argue and recount what really happened, but I quickly figured out that the hospital staff just assumed I was still delirious. They weren't going to believe me. I did discover that it had been a week and a half since the night that those things first attacked. After I was discharged from the hospital, I immediately quit my job at the state park. My supervisors didn't ask any questions. I saw that a missing persons report had been filed for Hank, but no law enforcement ever questioned me about what happened at the state park. In fact, there was never any reports at all of what happened in the park that night. And after that night, the strange animal sightings in the park just fizzled out soon after. I thought about going to the police and telling them my story about what happened, but I knew they would have just ignored what I said. After all, who would believe such a strange story? I hadn't believed Abigail at first. Surely no one would believe me either. Since then, I've moved across the country to a large city in an arid climate full of flatlands and desert. I want to be far away from any forest. I know that the media and law enforcement won't believe my story, but I recently heard about this subreddit from my girlfriend. She's the only one I've told this story to since then. She's the only one who believes me. She encouraged that I post this here. I think she hopes that it will be therapeutic for me. But I decided to post this story because I want to warn anyone who will listen. Watch out for the forests. There are things out in those deep woods far beyond human comprehension. Whatever I saw in that forest, I have no doubt that there's more out there. I remember what it said to Lita. It mentioned a war. It said it would be back. The people that go missing out in the forests, the strange things that happen. Maybe there really isn't a logical explanation for all of it. So if you start to see animals that look wrong with those white eyes in a forest, get out while you still have the chance, or they might just come for you next. I hope that my tale will serve as a warning to all of you who choose to listen to it. I haven't seen Lita or Briggs since that night, and I can only hope they're doing well wherever they are. While I still wonder what those things are that attacked that night, I'm too scared to really go looking for the answers I want. As far as I'm concerned, I hope I never have to step foot in another forest again. But another part of me has started to become less scared over the years. I feel angry for all the horrors these things brought on. They killed innocent and good people like those college kids and Hank. I want to know what they are, and I want to stop them. There's a state park a few hundred miles from me, and I've been seeing increased reports of animal attacks and missing persons there lately. Maybe I should go there and warn them before things go too far.